There are two versions of a person that exist at the same time inside a family like mine. The version that is true, and the version that gets introduced at dinner. For most of my life, I did not fully understand that those two versions were allowed to be different things. I had spent a long time believing that if I became enough of the true version, the introduced version would eventually catch up on its own, that the picture my father carried would update itself naturally the way calendars update, just by the passage of time and the accumulation of evidence. It caught up on a Thursday evening in November in a ballroom on the 14th floor of the Wyndham Grand in downtown Chicago, in front of 300 people, 40 minutes after my father told his senior partners that I was between jobs. My name is Saoirse Whitmore. I am 31 years old. I am a civil infrastructure consultant based in Chicago, Illinois, and I have been one since I was 26, when I left a structural engineering firm in Columbus to start a boutique consultancy that specializes in stormwater management contracts for mid-sized municipalities. I built it alone, in a one-bedroom apartment in Wicker Park, with a laptop and a civil engineering license and a client list that started at zero and grew by one careful relationship at a time. By the time I was 29, I had 4 full-time contracts with city governments in Illinois and Indiana, and a waiting list that stretched into the following calendar year. By the time I was 31, I had 7 staff, an office with 2 conference rooms on the 5th floor of a building in River North, and a reputation in my field specific enough that the Midwest Infrastructure Leadership Forum had reached out to me in September of last year to be their keynote speaker at the annual dinner. My father did not know any of this in the way that it was actually true. He knew pieces of it. He had been told pieces of it many times, in phone calls and at holiday dinners and in the occasional email I had sent with a project update because I had not yet stopped trying. But there is a specific kind of not knowing that has nothing to do with information and everything to do with whether a person has made room inside their picture of you for what the information actually means. My father had not made that room. The picture had been printed early, and he had been carrying it ever since, and no amount of information I added had changed the resolution. Before I tell you what happened in that ballroom, I want to pause here. Tell me what the weather is like where you are right now and where you are watching from, because I want to know how far this story reaches. Some truths travel better than others, and this one belongs to anyone who has ever been described to a room as less than they are by the person who should have known them best. My father, Dennis Whitmore, is 58 years old. He spent 27 years at a civil engineering firm called Lamarck and Associates in Naperville, Illinois, where he rose from project engineer to director of regional development. He is a careful man, thorough, measured, deliberate. He color codes his project files and arrives 14 minutes early to every meeting and holds his fork in the continental style he learned from his own father. He is the kind of father who paid for college without making it a point of leverage, who coached my brother Callum's soccer team for 6 consecutive seasons without missing a single Saturday, who remembered every teacher's name at every parent-teacher night and sent handwritten thank you notes at the end of each school year. He is not a bad man. He has never been a bad man. He is a man with a very specific internal model of what a career looks like and what success looks like and what his children's lives should look like inside that model, and that model was built in 1989 and has not been significantly revised since. My brother Callum is 34. He went to Purdue for civil engineering, graduated in 3 years and 11 months, joined a mid-sized firm in Indianapolis at 23, made project manager by 28, and is currently pursuing his PE license for a second state. My father talks about Callum's career the way certain men talk about a sports franchise they have followed since childhood, with proprietary investment, with the specific pleasure of someone whose prediction has been validated by events. He knows Callum's project numbers. He knows his billable hours. He knows the name of Callum's supervisor and the name of that supervisor's supervisor. When Callum made project manager in March of 2021, my father called me at 7:18 on a Tuesday evening not to share the news, but to ask me whether I had sent Callum a congratulations text yet. I had sent it at 9:07 that morning, for words so proud of you because I was and because I meant it. My father did not know this because he had not asked Callum. He had assumed that I might need prompting, the way he had always assumed that I might need prompting, because in his model, I was the one who sometimes needed to be reminded of the things that should come naturally. I grew up as the third thing in my family after the oldest child and after the favorite child, which are sometimes the same person, and in my family were both the same person, which was Callum. I do not say this with bitterness. I say it because it is structurally accurate, and because understanding the structure is the only way to understand what happened in November. I was not neglected. I was fed and clothed and educated and attended to in every practical sense. I was simply not the one my father's attention went looking for on its own. Callum was loud in the way my father recognized as productive. I was quiet in the way my father experienced as ambient. I read at the dinner table and drew floor plans in the margins of my notebooks and built things out of cardboard boxes in the garage, and my father walked past all of that the way you walk past furniture that has always been in the same place. He was not cruel about it. He simply did not see it as something that required his attention. The version of me he built during those years was the version of a capable but uncertain daughter, someone who had good instincts but lacked the specific kind of visible drive that he associated with real professional momentum. When I graduated from the University of Illinois with a degree in civil engineering at 22 and took a job at the Columbus firm, he said he was proud of me in the way he said most things, carefully, correctly, without particular warmth. When I was promoted to associate engineer at 24, he acknowledged it. When I was passed over for a senior role at 25 in favor of someone who had 2 fewer years of experience but a louder personality in meetings, I told my father about it on the phone, and he was quiet for a moment and then said, "Well, sometimes it comes down to fit. Don't let it discourage you." I was not discouraged. I was paying attention to what the experience was telling me, which was that I was not going to build what I wanted to build inside someone else's firm, and that the path I had in my head required me to own the client relationships rather than service them for someone else's margin. I began writing the business plan for what would become Whitmore Infrastructure Group in January of my 25th year at the kitchen table of my Columbus apartment, in the hours between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m., because those were the hours that were fully mine. When I left the Columbus firm at 26 and told my father over the phone on a Tuesday evening in April, he went quiet for a moment after I finished explaining. Then he said, in the careful, measured voice he uses for things he has already decided, "Saoirse, you have a good position there. For years of seniority. Starting something on your own at your age in this field without an existing client base is extremely difficult. I think you should sit with this for a few more weeks before you make any final decisions." I had given notice that morning. I told him that. There was another pause, longer than the first. "Well," he said, "let me know how it goes." In the years that followed, I sent him updates because I had not yet accepted that the updates were not landing. I called him at 8 months to tell him I had 2 signed contracts and a third in negotiation. He said that was a good start. I emailed him at 18 months to share that Whitmore Infrastructure had been selected as the lead consultant on a Phase 2 drainage retrofit project in Evanston that had beaten out 4 larger firms, including Lamarck and Associates. He replied 3 days later with 4 sentences that contained the phrase "very impressive once" and ended with a question about whether I had looked into professional liability insurance coverage. I had carried that coverage since month 1. I did not respond to the email. By the time I was 29 and had a staff of 3 and had crossed the revenue threshold I had set for myself in the original business plan, I had stopped sending updates. Not in anger. In the quiet recognition that I was narrating my own life to someone who had already written the ending, and that the energy it took to keep narrating was energy I needed for the work. My father's version of me remained, the daughter who had left a stable job for something uncertain. The Midwest Infrastructure Leadership Forum invitation arrived in my email at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in September. It was from Patricia Holt, the forum's events director, who had been referred to me by a municipal client in Evanston. The forum held its annual dinner every November at the Wyndham Grand in downtown Chicago. 300 attendees, engineers, city planners, infrastructure directors, consultants from across the tri-state region. The keynote speaker delivered a 45-minute presentation followed by a 10-minute Q&A. The honorarium was $4,800 and included a full speaker profile in the printed program, a photograph, and a bio of up to 150 words. I accepted before 8 a.m. I spent 11 weeks preparing. I built a 47-slide deck on adaptive stormwater infrastructure for aging municipal systems, built around 3 case studies drawn from contracts I had completed in 2022 and 2023. I hired Jenna Park, a graphic designer I had worked with on client-facing presentations, who spent 4 working sessions with me over 3 weeks refining the visual design of the deck until every slide said exactly what I needed it to say and nothing else. I wrote the full talk out by hand, and then condensed it to a 1-page outline, and then condensed the outline to margin notes, and then practiced until the notes were unnecessary. On the 3rd Saturday in October, I drove to the Wyndham Grand, walked into the empty ballroom on the 14th floor, stood at the podium, and looked at the room for a long time. The room seated 300 comfortably with additional standing space at the back. The podium was centered on the stage. The screen behind it was 11 feet wide. My father's firm, Lamarck and Associates, was one of the forum's annual sponsors. He had attended the dinner for 19 consecutive years. He was on the registered attendee list. I had known this when Patricia Holt's email arrived, had known it while I was sitting with my coffee and looking at the forum's website in the 6 minutes before I wrote my reply. I thought about telling him. I thought about it seriously and more than once, including one evening in October when he called and asked if I had plans on November 14th, and I had started to form a sentence that began with actually before he told me that Lamarck was hosting a table and he had thought Callum and I might want to come as his guests. I said I had a work commitment that evening. He said that was perfectly fine. The forum's printed program was delivered to all registered attendees as a digital PDF 10 days before the dinner. My name was on the cover. Keynote, Saoirse Whitmore, Principal Consultant, Whitmore Infrastructure Group, Chicago, Illinois. My photograph was on page 4 alongside a 148-word bio that Patricia Holt and I had revised twice to get exactly right. Whether my father opened that email, I do not know with certainty. What I know is that when he saw me in the reception area of the Wyndham Grand at 6:29 p.m. on November 14th, the version he introduced to senior partners had not changed. I arrived at the hotel at 5:30 p.m. sharp, 90 minutes before the dinner began. I had driven myself from my apartment in Lincoln Park and parked in the hotel garage on level 2. I wore a charcoal blazer and gray trousers and the black ankle boots I had bought for the International Stormwater Conference in Denver in 2022 and worn to every significant professional event since. I met Patricia Holt in the lobby at 5:37 p.m. She walked me through the ballroom, introduced me to the AV coordinator, a man named Terrence Mills, who showed me the remote clicker and its backup and the monitor on the podium face that would display my speaker notes. We ran slides 1 through 4 to confirm the display settings. I made one adjustment to the font size on the note feed. Everything else was correct. At 6:09 p.m., I went back downstairs to the reception level and stood near the buffet and ate a plate of food standing up, the way I have eaten before every speaking engagement since I learned that I think more clearly on a full stomach. At 6:14 p.m., I moved to a high-top table near the window with a glass of sparkling water and began reviewing my opening 3 paragraphs from memory. At 6:29 p.m., I heard my father's voice across the room. He was 16 feet away, standing with 3 men in dark suits near the entrance to the main ballroom. I recognized Marcus Webb immediately, 62 years old, senior partner at Lamarck, my father's direct superior for the past 9 years, a man I had met twice at firm holiday parties when I was in my early 20s. The other 2 I did not know by name. My father was mid-sentence when I turned, and for one fraction of a moment I saw him register my presence before his expression had time to rearrange itself, and something moved across his face that was brief and complex, and then was gone. He walked over. He was smiling the way he smiles at company events, controlled, practiced, the smile of a man who knows exactly how he is supposed to look in every professional setting. "Saoirse," he said. "I didn't realize you'd be here tonight." "Work commitment," I said. He nodded. He placed his hand briefly on my shoulder, which is what he does when he wants to establish warmth without having to generate it, and then he turned back toward the 3 men, and something inside me went very still as I understood in the span of a single breath exactly what was coming and exactly that I could not stop it without creating a scene in the middle of the reception area of the Wyndham Grand 14 floors above Lake Michigan, which I was not going to do. "Gentlemen," my father said, "this is my daughter Saoirse. Marcus, you'll remember I've mentioned her. She's been between jobs for a bit, still figuring out the direction of the next move. Marcus Webb looked at me with the practiced warmth of a man who has met the children of colleagues many hundreds of times and has developed a reliable expression for receiving information about them without requiring it to be interesting. "Nice to meet you," he said. "You as well," I said. I smiled. I held the smile for the duration of the exchange, which lasted perhaps 45 seconds. I did not correct my father. I did not say "actually," or "that's not quite right," or any of the sentences that existed in my throat, and that I chose, deliberately and with full awareness of what I was choosing not to say. The men moved on. I set my glass of sparkling water down on the high-top table. I picked it up again. I stood in that spot and looked at the room filling with 300 people who were about to find out something my father did not know was coming, and I thought about what I was feeling, which was not anger, not satisfaction, not grief exactly, but something older and more structural than any of those things. What I was feeling was recognition. The completion of a pattern so total and so precise that there was nothing left to misunderstand about it. My father had looked at me in that reception area after 5 years of a thriving consultancy and a staff of 7 and a contract list that included 6 municipal governments, and he had seen the daughter who left a stable job. The version he had been carrying since I was 26. He had introduced that version to his senior partner with the comfortable confidence of a man who believes he knows what he is talking about. He had the digital program in his email inbox, and he had still said "between jobs," which meant either that he had not read it or that he had read it and the version had not updated, and I did not know which of those two things was more true, but I knew that both of them told me something I needed to understand clearly. I stood at the high-top table for 6 minutes. Then I went back upstairs to the ballroom. The dinner began at 7 p.m. I was seated at a small table near the left of the stage with Patricia Holt and 2 other presenters who were delivering shorter segments before the keynote. My father was seated at a sponsored table near the center of the room. I could see the back of his head from where I sat. I watched the first 2 presentations from my seat, tracking my own breathing the way I had learned to track it before speaking engagements, the way my vocal coach Renata Voss had taught me 2 years earlier when I hired her for 6 sessions to work on pacing and breath support. I reviewed my opening 3 paragraphs one last time, and then turned my phone face down on the table. At 7:41 p.m. Patricia Holt leaned toward me and said quietly, "You're up in 3 minutes." I nodded. I took a single slow breath. I looked at the room. At 7:44 p.m. Patricia Holt walked to the podium and said, "Our keynote this evening needs very little introduction." She is the principal consultant of Whitmore Infrastructure Group here in Chicago, the recipient of the 2023 APWA Great Lakes Region Award for Excellence in Stormwater Design, and the lead consultant on the Evanston Phase 2 drainage retrofit that was delivered 6 weeks ahead of schedule and $340,000 under budget. Please welcome Saoirse Whitmore. 300 people applauded. I stood. I walked from the edge of the stage to the podium in 14 steps. My name appeared on the 11-foot screen behind me in large, white text. I looked at the room, at the 300 faces arranged in concentric semicircles, at the back wall, at Terrence Mills standing near the AV board with his arms crossed and his expression professionally neutral. I found the center of the room the way I had practiced finding it in October, when the chairs were empty, and I began. I spoke for 46 minutes. The talk held its shape the way it holds its shape when you have prepared it well enough that the preparation disappears, and what remains is just the material and the room. The third section, the one on cost-benefit modeling for phased retrofit approaches, was the section I had been most uncertain about in rehearsal, the section where I thought I might lose the room's attention, and instead it was the section where I felt the room shift from polite engagement to genuine attention, felt it the way you feel a temperature change, the quality of the silence going from waiting to listening. I took 8 questions in the Q&A. The last was from a man named Gerald Okafor, municipal director for the city of Gary, Indiana, who asked a detailed question about applying the modeling framework to combined sewer overflow events. I answered him for 4.5 minutes. When I finished, the room was still for a moment before the applause started, which is the best kind of still. Patricia Holt thanked me at 8:38 p.m. The room applauded again. I walked back to my seat and drank water and sat through the closing remarks, which ended at 9:04 p.m. In the post-session networking period, I spoke with 6 people. A water resources engineer from Rockford named Deshawn Pratt who had a question about my sediment modeling methodology. A city planner from Oak Park. A woman from a municipal bond advisory firm whose name I did not catch. And Sandra Ferris, 51, municipal director of infrastructure for Joliet, Illinois, who introduced herself at 9:11 p.m., shook my hand with the direct grip of someone accustomed to job sites and budget meetings, and asked whether I was accepting new contracts in the first quarter of next year. I said I was currently building my Q1 schedule and would be happy to discuss scope. She gave me her card. I wrote her name and Joliet Q1 Stormwater in the Notes app on my phone at 9:17 p.m. At 9:23 p.m. my father appeared near the coat room. He was holding his coat over one arm. Behind him, Marcus Webb and the two other partners were retrieving their own coats. My father stopped in front of me. He had the look of a man who has spent the last 2 hours composing a sentence and is not yet certain it is the right one. I didn't know, he said. I know you didn't, I said. A pause. How long has the firm been operating? 5 years in April. He nodded slowly. Patricia Holt told me during the break that you've presented at regional forums before. This is the 3rd year. Another pause. He looked at the floor briefly, and then back at me. The Evanston Project. I've heard of that project. We saw it on a shortlist in 2021. You were on the same shortlist, I said. Lamarck was one of the 5 firms that bid. He was quiet. You won the contract. Yes. He stood with that for a moment. He was recalibrating something. I could see the recalibration happening in the particular way he holds his jaw when he is processing information that does not match his existing model. It was not a dramatic expression. It was the expression of a careful man doing careful arithmetic and arriving at an answer he had not expected. I wish you had told me, he said. I looked at him steadily and said the thing I had been saying in one form or another for 5 years, the thing I had said in phone calls and emails and holiday dinners, the thing that had landed and not updated. Dad, I have been telling you. For 5 years I have been telling you. You just weren't updating the picture. He had no answer for that. I did not need him to have one. I was not standing in that coat room because I needed to be vindicated. I was standing there because I had given a 46-minute keynote to 300 people and a woman from Joliet had given me her card and I had a follow-up email to write, and my father happened to be standing between me and the elevator. The account between us was not going to close in a hotel coat room. I had spent enough time with my therapist, Dr. Amara Osei, who I had been seeing every other Thursday at her practice on North Michigan Avenue for 2 years, to understand that accounts like ours do not close in single scenes. They close slowly or partially or not at all, and the work is deciding what you can live with on each side of those outcomes. I'd like to talk this week, he said, if you're open to it. Saturday morning, I said. Yes. I got my coat. I said goodbye to Patricia Holt at 9:29 p.m. She held my hand for a moment and said the committee would be in touch about the following year's program. I took the elevator down to the parking garage and got into my car and sat for a moment in the quiet of level 2 with the engine off. Not the complicated quiet of someone who needs to process what just happened. A different quiet. The quiet of something that has been traveling toward a place for a long time and has finally arrived. I drove home on Lakeshore Drive with the radio off. The lake was flat and dark on my left, and the city was fully lit on my right, and I thought about the one-bedroom apartment in Wicker Park and the 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. hours and the client list at 0, and the first signed contract, and the 47 slides, and the 11 weeks, and the 4 years before that, and Renata Voss counting my breath in a recording studio in Pilsen on a Wednesday afternoon while I practiced an opening I would not use for 2 more years. All of it was real regardless of who had been watching. All of it had happened regardless of whose picture it had appeared in. My father called at 10:17 p.m. I was at my kitchen table with my coat still on, writing the follow-up email to Sandra Ferris, while the details of the conversation were still precise in my memory. I watched the phone light up. I let it ring, not as punishment, because I was in the middle of something that mattered and the moment for the other conversation had not yet arrived, and I have learned to tell the difference. He called again at 10:41 p.m. I let that ring too. At 11:02 p.m., a text arrived. Saoirse, I want to apologize for what I said to Marcus. It was wrong and it wasn't accurate, and I've been sitting with it for 2 hours. I think I've been wrong about a number of things for a while. Can we talk this week? I read it twice. I set the phone down face first on the table and finished the email to Sandra Ferris. I sent it at 11:09 p.m. Then I read the text a third time and thought about what I wanted to say and what had already been said and what was true and what was still unresolved and what might never be fully resolved no matter how many Saturdays we spent on it. I put the phone in my coat pocket and took off my coat and hung it on the hook by the door and made chamomile tea and stood at the window looking at the parking lot below my building, at the orange glow of the lot lights on the wet pavement, at the quiet of a Thursday night in Lincoln Park after 11 p.m. I replied the next morning at 8:14 a.m. I said yes, Saturday would work. I said I wanted the conversation to be real, not the version where we agree that it was a misunderstanding and that everyone means well, and we return to ordinary distance having produced the appearance of resolution. He replied within 4 minutes and said he understood. We spoke on Saturday at 10:30 a.m. The call lasted an hour and 19 minutes. He apologized twice, and neither apology was performed. He told me that he had gone home after the dinner and found the email with the forum program and had read my bio 3 times. He said that he had started to understand, sitting in his study on Thursday night, that the version he had been carrying of me was not just outdated but had required active maintenance, that it had not updated because he had, on some level, been choosing not to update it, because updating it required him to look at what the old version had cost me in terms of what I had not received from him during the years I was building something real. That was the most honest thing he said in the entire conversation. I sat with it for a long time before I responded. I told him that I believed him. I told him that believing him and trusting the change were different things, and that I was willing to stay present for the second while we found out whether it was going to happen. We ended the call without resolution, which was correct. Resolution would have been the wrong outcome for a first honest conversation. Resolution would have meant we were performing again. Marcus Webb emailed my firm's inquiry address the following Monday at 11:23 a.m. He had looked up Whitmore Infrastructure Group after the dinner. He was interested in discussing an infrastructure capacity assessment for a multi-municipality water management project in the western suburbs. My associate Priya Naidu, who manages all client intake, forwarded it to my inbox at 11:47 a.m. with a single line, "This one's yours." I called Marcus Webb on Tuesday at 2 p.m. We spoke for 22 minutes. He did not mention the dinner or the reception or my father's introduction. I did not mention any of it either. We scheduled a scoping call for the following Thursday at 3:30 p.m. His assistant sent the calendar invite at 2:17 p.m. The hardest part about being underestimated by people who do not know you is the energy it takes to prove them wrong. The hardest part about being underestimated by family is realizing, long after you have proven them wrong, that they had a choice about whether to update the picture, and they kept making the same choice, and that the reason they kept making it had nothing to do with the quality of your evidence. Some people love you genuinely and still build a version of you that fits their comfort better than it fits your truth. That is not cruelty. It is a limit, which is a different thing, and limits do not disappear because you walk to a podium. They have to be named first, plainly, in a conversation that does not allow both people to feel comfortable at the same time. My father is doing something now that I would not have predicted 18 months ago. He is asking questions about the work. Not the polite questions he used to ask, the ones shaped more like reassurance than curiosity. He is asking about methodology and about client relationships and about the modeling approach I described at the forum, and the questions are specific in the way that real interest is specific. I do not know yet whether the update is permanent. I am watching carefully and staying present and not carrying the outcome further than the conversation I am currently in. Real family should be the place where the version that gets introduced at dinner is the same as the version that is true. Where love does not require evidence to update its picture. Where a child does not have to become a keynote speaker for a parent to stop saying between jobs. Those two things are not always the same family, and learning that they are not the same family is not the end of the story. It is just the beginning of the honest one. If you have ever been introduced to a room as something smaller than you are by someone who had every piece of information and still chose the smaller version, I want to ask you something directly. Did you correct them in the moment? Or did you walk to the podium and let the room find out on its own? And if you let the room find out, when the applause started and they finally looked at you the way you had always been, was there something almost peaceful about that? Not satisfaction, exactly. Something quieter than that. Something that felt like the truth finally being allowed to simply be itself, without anyone's permission, without any introduction at all. The family dynamics in this story reflect experiences many people navigate in silence. If themes of visibility, professional identity, and family expectations resonate with you, there are communities and resources available that address these patterns directly. You don't have to carry this alone.